ladies and gentlemen, what is the difference between main tank and off tank? How many of you guys remember those old terms from Overwatch 1 when we had 2 tanks? What's the difference? One makes space, one takes space, okay. Main tank creates space, off tank holds space, sure. Main tank is Ryan, off tank is everybody else. Okay. One stays with team, one plays like a DPS. Okay. So let me give you guys the definition really quick. A main tank is anything that initiates. Anything that initiates to create space for their team. Usually done so quickly and violently. It's not a slow accumulation of pressure. It is a quick accumulation of pressure. You could also call main tanks push tanks, where there is a immediate, direct, violent threat to the enemy team. And main tanks do this exclusively. All of them. Now, the reason why main tank was used as a terminology and off tank was used is because a main tank would play, again, like the flex support, main support, where they'd play a specific hero, and then the off tank would pick around that to supplement that. The main tank's job is to violently create space. Aggressively, loudly, immediately, and quickly create space. How does a Doomfist do it? He gets in there. How does a Junker Queen do it? Because a Junker Queen violently creates space. She hits a Gracie, and she beats the crap out of you. She commits. She initiates. Right? How does a Malga do it? You get what I'm saying? It goes down the list. A lot of tanks are main tanks. They are initiators. They are push tanks. Orisa does so like this. Javelin spin, get in there, juice it up. Immediate, loud, violent threat. An immediate. Ramatra, Wrecking Ball, Winston, Reinhardt. Violent, dangerous, immediate threat. They're loud. An off tank is somebody that supplements the person creating space. That's what they do. They supplement the people that create space. You see, one of the problems with D.Va is because she's still kind of slow compared to other mobile tanks, and because she can't shoot and Matrix at the same time, I mean, besides missiles, right? She's not really immediately and violently threatening, especially if there's any distance between you. In fact, a vast majority of her value comes through helping other people to create space or helping other people to hold space. And essentially what they've done is by repeatedly buffing her over and over and over again, they've tried to fit the square peg into the circle hole or vice, right? And they've just jammed it in there until it works, but they've eventually they had to end up over-tuning her because the identity of her kit is not to initiate. It's not to initiate. D.Va can delete, yes, if the circumstances are right. If the circumstances are right. But they've had to overtune her to such a degree to where that's even possible. All right? Zarya is the same way. Zarya can't brute force anything. If she walks forward with nothing to bubble but herself, yes, she can do damage. But can she violently and quickly apply a lot of pressure? No, she can't. In fact, the only way that's even remotely possible if she's developed charge before the fight even starts. It's much more patient. It's much more enabling her teammates or peeling off or enabling aggression. And even when it is selfishly focused, it takes time to accumulate that. Her entire kit is revolved around helping somebody else to violently and aggressively create space. Roadhog, the question is why does Roadhog, I want you guys to think back to the Overwatch 1 Roadhog. Why was Roadhog considered an off tank? Did Roadhog enable, directly enable other people to take space through bubble, matrix, and so on? He didn't. But why was Roadhog still considered an off tank? Why was he still considered off tank? Because remember, the definition of a main tank is an initiator, a pusher. Roadhog can't do that. He's too fragile. He can't. He maybe has a burst of window of value, but he gets blown up, right? So anything that isn't an initiator is usually an off tank. You guys understand? It's the same thing with Sigma. Like, why is Sigma an off tank, right? It's not because Sigma has some sort of like supplement. I mean, he did supplement Orisa's weaknesses, right, in a way, but he didn't enable his Orisa all that much. I mean, you could sometimes. You could shield her to allow her, but more than Sigma was more about the fact that he couldn't initiate. So he was an off tank. That's it. Now, he did supplement in some ways, controlling off angles and so on, but it was more of a I'm not a main tank, so yeah, you do your thing. Now, this is the one question for those of you guys that can remember Overwatch 1 Orisa. How on earth was Orisa a main tank in Overwatch 1? How is Orisa, by definition, an initiator? Think about it. Because, you know, she had her shield, she had her hull and her poke weapon. How is she an initiator? Because she absolutely was. Right, it was halt. Shield to safely and aggressively apply pressure with halt. Halt, for those of you guys that don't know, was essentially a ball. Emong had it with a content creator patch, where you'd shoot out a ball, and then you with your right click. And then you'd press your right click again to detonate the ball, and it would suck anybody near within like 5 meters into the ball. So it was like a pull. It was like a pulling people out of position. And it was really good. Halt was arguably one of the best cooldowns in the game. Yes, I agree. Because it was really good at setting up initiations by either pulling people back, pulling people forward, or heck, let's push forward. Let's pull that hit scan out of position. I'm going to put down my shield. I still have the muscle memory. I'm going to halt like right there, pull them out and shoot them in the face. Create space. You are a violent, immediate threat right there. You create your own value now. You're creating value for your team. You're creating a big noise. And that's what main tanks are. They're initiators, they're pushers, they create space, they create threat. They might do so from medium range, short range, usually short range, but they're going to initiate threat. That's it. Bam! They get in your face, they create initiation. Wrecking ball. And so the reason why there's so much confusion around the main tank category, how many of you guys remember people going, can we have a shield tank? Can we have a main tank? A shield does not make a main tank or initiator. Ryan isn't a main tank just because he has a shield. It's because he is an immediate and loud and violent threat as soon as he decides to drop that shield. He is now immediate threat. And not only that, but he also has abilities like Fire Strike and crucially Pin to be that immediate loud initiation. You see that? And that's something that Sigma just doesn't have. It's slow, it's consistent, he builds up threat. And Sigma doesn't have that. So all a main tank is an initiator, a pusher, a creator of space, and an off tank is somebody that either indirectly or directly supports that. And that's it. Because a lot of hype around D.Va and Zarya is about how they peeled for their backline. How many of you guys hear people talk about, oh, I love playing D.Va and peeling for my backline. I love playing Zarya and peeling for my backline. How many of you guys hear that all the time, right? I remember back in the day, right? It's bogus. It's awful. In Overwatch 1, the vast majority of D.Va and Zarya's value was not peeling your backline. It was helping your tank take space. So does JQ land under main tank because of the knife? Among other things, yes. It is an initiation tool. Yes. So the reason why this is important is because why we've struggled sometimes with Overwatch 2 tank design is because with the removal of one tank, tanks that don't have initiation capabilities cooked into their kit sometimes struggle. Characters like Zarya don't have a tank to bubble. D.Vas don't have a tank to matrix. So their entire aspects of their kit are gone. Now, I'm not playing this necessarily to be only 66 is the greatest. We're going to talk more about some of the downsides of this later on. But it's essentially these identities are no longer there. And then for tanks like Roadhog, who didn't necessarily provide value. Now, I hate Roadhog, right? We've talked about it. Well, tanks like Roadhog, they didn't provide any direct tank value. Roadhog could benefit off of some other loud jackass push tank. Roadhog benefited from his main tank making noise. You're listening to the big, loud German Hulk of armor. I get the space to take an angle and look for a hook. In fact, the only time where Hog was the main tank was when Hog was wildly overtuned and paired with Zarya, so that he could walk right into the middle of your team with a Zarya bubble and just kill. He was a violent initiator, but he needed the support to be able to do that. You guys get what I'm saying? Whereas Sigma, you could give Sigma a Zarya bubble. What the frick is Sigma going to do with a Zarya bubble? There's no violence. There's no explosive threat. There's no hook. There's no halt. There's no pin or swing. It's just slow pressure. Maybe you could bubble it and that's it. It just doesn't work. So what main tank really does is it's that violent initial trade. And I keep using the word violent because violence is in the very definition of the word, not just the actual threat itself, but it's the psychology of it. Even the word violence makes you unsettled. And that's what main tanks do. They make you unsettled. They bother you. They get in your head. They're in your face. They're loud. They're obnoxious. They're obvious. They're Doomfists and Balls and Winstons. And they're Junker Queens. And that's what the main tank does. It's that initiation that says, hey, I'm going to knock your face in. Look at me. Don't look at my DPS. And that's what the Overwatch 1 strategy was. And you had a tank to help you do that. That's why 2 off tanks was so bad, because you didn't have that immediate violence to threaten and bait attention. It was just hard. It was just hard. And so you needed something, even if it was a mismatch of one of those things, a violent initiator and somebody helping that person or capitalizing off of that space. Okay? So that violence is necessary. And there's a lot of off tanks right now that have not done so well. In fact, why do you guys think Roadhog got Vape reworked in Overwatch 2? Now, I don't like his rework, but why did Roadhog need a Vape rework to function? Think about it. Right, so he can actually actively take space better, because he can walk through a choke and go, frick you guys. Oh, it got canceled? I don't give a frick. I'm going to do it again. He's allowed to be violent on his own, because he has the violence into his kit. He just doesn't have the capability to sustain that violence. Or at least he didn't. He does now. He does now. So he is his own peel. And the problem is that a lot of tanks in Overwatch 2 need their own peel, but not all peel or support is created alike. Winston has bubble. This gives him options versus burst CC, burst CDs. But Roadhog, he just presses right click. And so we won't delve into that, or Orisa presses shift. We won't delve into that, but there's characters like Sigma and Winston have more healthy ways of supporting themselves, off tanking for themselves, support, and other characters some have some unhealthy ways, essentially. Less skillful ways. So to be an initiator, to be a push tank, you have to be violent. To be an off tank, you have to not be violent. You have to be more indirect. And that's why D.Va has been such a problem, is because she is scaled up in violence while still having the support capabilities, which just makes her an ugly duckling right now. So the reason why this is important is this is where the fundamental distribution of Overwatch 2 responsibilities have changed. Let's pull up Microsoft Paint and let's talk about this, okay? So how a team fight would break out is you had violence and you had violence. Violence matching the violence, head-to-head explosive power, and the tank supplementing that violence and the tank supplementing that violence. Now, this was a big mess. And to supplement this, you needed healing, a lot of it, to pressure and control this kind of stuff. And this is often how Overwatch 1 looked. Now, the other option is sometimes the off tank could take an angle. So they would support the violence by taking that window of opportunity to either support the tank directly or to go take an angle at this point in time. Where in any angle where a tank went on, usually was an angle that a DPS or support could not contest. Now, I know there's some people that have different takes on that, but this is how it was, right? A Hanzo could not contest a D.Va up close. So any angle where that D.Va was, the Hanzo had to leave. And so then it was required your tank to take the tank trade on off tank flank, main tank take the trade on main, and that usually left one more lane for DPS and support to provide pressure. And usually, as I mentioned, with 2 tanks, the supports were often tied up with supporting the tank here. This is how Overwatch worked for years. For years. You either had 1 lane double tank combo or 1 lane 2 lanes controlled by tanks, and then the third is open for the DPS. Usually kind of how things worked out, okay? And so as a DPS, your job was to assist either one of the lanes or to take the one that was free and duel for it. As a support, usually helping the tanks take trades or looking to help your DPS, and there's just a lot less space for supports to move. Now, what's happened here in Overwatch 2 is let's ignore some of the nuance for just a second. Let's pretend that our tanks are trading on main. It's not always how it works out, but let's just say that that's how it goes right now. There's no more off tank. There's no more off tank. So these lanes are free. Free. Totally free. Anybody, first come, first serve. There's no tank to contest. There's no, there's no big mess there that you can get and caught out as a DPS or support. So when you're main tanking, you're initiating and you're pushing, who is the off tank that is then either supporting the taking of the space or taking space elsewhere as a result of the big noise that you're making? Because everyone's looking at the big red right here. Everyone's looking at big red right here. He's putting a lot of... So who's doing this? Right. The supports and the DPS. Oftentimes, more often than not, the DPS. So the DPS are the new Roadhogs, essentially, where they don't really support the tank directly, but it is their responsibility to, when the tank goes in, that they take the space. That is not where the tank is, because the tank makes noise, the bodies slap, the muscle and meat and metal is grinding, and you take where they are not. And the problem is that a lot of DPS didn't and don't understand this. They don't understand this, because this is where the money is made. Because you get to here, and now you have access to better shoot their tank, better shoot their backline, or continue to flank further. Okay? This is how Overwatch is played. But I will go one more than that. I'll go one more than that. Responsibilities have not only changed for DPS, but they've also changed for the supports. Because in Overwatch 1, there were 2 tanks that demanded healing, and you need to supplement them taking space, while occasionally taking space in your own, but mostly not. It was a lot more congested. So in Overwatch 2, again, we're not comparing Overwatch 1 or Overwatch 2 in terms of the quality of the game, but how the theory works right now. Overwatch 2, what is the responsibility of the supports more like nowadays? If you guys are in my chat, you probably know the answer, but let's talk about it. What's your responsibility for support? To support the angle. To support the creation of space on your DPS. So it's kind of the same job, but it's not necessarily the same target. It's not the same target. So you are assisting this here, or this here. So there's a little bit more important decision making about where your resources go. It's a little bit more important with where your resources go. And this is also where a lot of Overwatch 2 supports have and had really struggled about knowing what to do. Because a lot of supports in Overwatch 1 were used to saying that there's a tank stuffing this choke right here, so I don't need to worry about this choke right here. That's not how it works anymore. There is threats from all sides, and it's your job to contest and control those threats. And so really what ends up happening is the off-tank becomes the DPS. The support becomes what's assisting the off-tank and the main tank. And so there's a lot more responsibility to assist the tank with taking space, right? And that's where people mess up. The cycle of the tank... See, this is the other thing, too. When this trade happens, how long does this trade often last? Anybody tell me? How long does this trade usually last? Think Reinhardt versus Rein, Ram versus Ram, Junker Queen versus Diva, Winston versus so-and-so, Ball versus that. Well, how long does that usually last? It depends, right? But often not very long. It could be frequent, going in and out. It could be one big bubble dive and then chilling for a second. This is called tempo. When people say tempo, I don't know if this is what everyone means by tempo, but this is the proper definition of tempo, where it's the timing of the engage. We've talked about this many times. So the timing is important because this trade cannot last forever. So you have a limited window of time when these enemies are going to be distracted and or threatened by your tank trade. And so you must capitalize off of that and take the space at that window of time. If you miss that window of time, your tank has put pressure out for nothing. Some tanks have faster cycles. Winston has a very slow cycle. He has bubble, then he chills. Wrecking Ball can go in and in and in and in and in, right? So Overwatch 1 supports in conclusion took no space and were terribly boosted players that were inferior to the DPS players. Not necessarily true.
Play the main tank spot so the off-tank tanks can work again.
Great point, Brax. We're going to talk about that in a second. I would say in Overwatch 1, the support's decision value was more about decision making and how they assisted tank trades. and how they maintain distance from those tank trades so they did not get traded by those tank trades. In Overwatch 2, it's a lot more decision making about how you take space. Yes. So Brax makes a great point. In Overwatch 2, how does a Zarya function? How does a Zarya function? And if you guys have ever watched pro-level Zarya metas, and we've only had a couple, a lot of the times with pro Zarya metas, the Zarya is not the initiator. She's not the main tank or the push tank. Who is? Who is? You guys ever watched a pro Zarya meta? Who is? It's the Bubble Reaper or a Genji. We even have occasional situations with Venture, right? It's to bubble another person who is taking the space as the initiator. The Zarya supplements that space. And what makes Zarya unique is once that initiation has happened, what does she now have? She has charge. So now she's ready. Once you've initiated for me, thanks for the space, buddy. I'll take it from here. And that's essentially what an off tank does.
It's sometimes Brig.
Sometimes Brig, yeah. You allow somebody else to initiate for you, and then you help them to initiate, and then you reward them for initiating for you. Bubble the violent threat. Exactly. Bubble the violent threat. Exactly. So that's a lot of what, no, it's not necessarily a true CMT. However, piercing damage and shield can help you to be violent, which is what the initiation or the definition of a main tank is. So basically here, this is why this is important. When you are playing DPS, your job is to pay attention to your tank's tempo to know when you should be taking space. Your job as a support is to assist your tank, but also to make sure that your DPS's attempts to take space are rewarded, and maybe even taking space yourself. You see, if you guys have ever watched high-level Lucio play in Overwatch 1, especially around a lot of the brawlier metas, very, very dull a lot of the times. Very dull. Because there weren't a lot of choices about where you could go. It was really about taking and assisting the tank trade and positioning yourself to heal as many targets and speed as many targets as possible. Now, Lucio has to decide, do I assist the tank trade? Do I assist this angle here? Or do I assist this angle here? Or maybe we've lost this angle and now I have to peel my backline. And so the choices of a Lucio and the support as a whole are much more complicated. Much more complicated. So what we have now is DPS and supports. You guys have responsibility to assist your tank in taking space, enable your tank in taking space, and to be taking space yourself. And for tank design, if you guys want to give feedback about what is wrong or what isn't wrong with a tank, the question has to be, does every tank in Overwatch 2 need to be an initiator? Because there is no other target to enable. Or can we find a way to make characters like Diva and Zarya enable their DPS, enable other people to initiate, or enable themselves to initiate? How do you do that? How do you balance that? Is that possible in a 5v5 format? I think maybe, but it's hard. You're gonna have to put a lot of work and a lot of thought into it. I think Zarya has potential because she can help enable other people if she wants to, and if she doesn't like it, she can help herself. But it's a tricky balance. It's the Mercy problem. Yes, in a way it is. Where Mercy has no way to directly enable herself, she can only enable her teammates, which not only reduces the decision-making of the character, but it also leaves you with some fickle situations. I think the issue is that when tanks are so much disproportionately stronger than the other roles, it's hard to enable a DPS enough to match the enemy tank's value. Right, so when you're enabling a DPS, usually it's away from the tank. And that is a very fair criticism of the current iteration of the 5v5 format, and maybe the 5v5 format as a whole. I think what Tony is saying is correct. I think the question is can we make enabling... The problem is can we make enabling abilities more universally useful? Because the problem is that a bubble just isn't that useful for most people. Because you're essentially waiting for them to be initiated on, but what if they don't get initiated on? That's why Reaper Genji are useful, because they can go in aggressively and force themselves to become targets, but a lot of DPS characters just don't have that. A lot of DPS characters have mobility that is more about avoiding damage, like a Tracer, for example, right? She shouldn't always want a bubble because she doesn't even want to take damage in the first place. So it's awkward. It's awkward. And I do say that in Overwatch 2, enabler tanks are a lot worse. Now, this is where we're going to take one more pivot. Food for thought here with the Overwatch 1 versus Overwatch 2 and 5, 6. Okay. Last food for thought here. There's a very clear identity design intention behind the initiation of Overwatch 1. I was talking about this with Poopkip earlier. And Overwatch 1, they had characters designed very clearly to fill niches. Zarya, very clear about what her intention was. Diva, I don't know if it was intended that way, but it's obviously what it worked out. Torbjorn, defense characters, sniper characters, brawl characters, speed characters, pocket characters, teleport characters. Everybody had a puzzle piece to bring to the table. The way to think about it is that if you want to cook a delicious meal, you have a little bit of you've got some flour and you've got some spices and you've got your meat and you've got your vegetables and you've got your drink and everyone had something unique to bring to the table. And now in Overwatch 2, those are still very much identifiable, where every single character has very defined strengths and weaknesses, but the edges are taken off of them very clearly. Juno is a great example. I think a lot of fun, but Juno doesn't have a specific really powerful strength or really powerful weakness. Maybe her fragility is her weakness, but even then she has options, right? She's not a Zen. She's not a Widow. She's not a Sombra, and she's not a Rein, at least in the initial launch Rein. She's not an initial launch Reaper. She's not an initial launch Bastion. She's not an initial launch Torbjorn, and so on. And the reason why the game was designed like this, even going back to like the RPG element of many of the developers like Jeff Kaplan, is because the identity of a team is the unique strengths of 5 or 6 different people, I guess 6, 1, 2, 3, I need to get another one in here, added together to make a beautiful and delicious meal. You guys get me? Freaking Overwatch 1, man. Everyone brought their strengths and weaknesses to the table and they made something beautiful. And that is not something that we have as much in Overwatch 2 because those defined strengths and weaknesses to complement each other to create this beautiful synergy isn't there anymore. Okay? But, and this is where I'm going to advocate for Overwatch 2 a little bit, okay? There's a problem here. There's a problem here. What's the problem? Now, some of you guys are saying, oh, goats. Well, yeah, true. There is a world where the meal is a little too delicious, and it just dominates everything else. But that's not even the main problem. And that's not the problem. The problem is what? What is the reality of a team game? The reality of the team game is that somebody's going to show up to the meal. They were supposed to bring the meat, but they brought more spices. We already have a lot of spice. And then somebody was supposed to bring the drink, but they brought more flour. Like, bro, we're already good with flour, man. Like, we don't need. And somebody was supposed to bring, the carb or whatever, the potatoes. You get what I'm saying? But they showed up with another dessert. We now have like 3 desserts. The problem was not the potential ceiling of the synergy, because that is something that you can, in theory, balance around. The problem is that people are people. People want to play what they want to play. And if you make characters that have very specific strengths and weaknesses and require people to play around them or support them or are required to support other people, you have a disgusting mess if things don't work out that well. That's the problem. And that's how it was. That's how it was before Rollock. That's how it was before Hero Reworks. That's how it was when they introduced characters like Brig, when they introduced characters like Sigma, when they introduced characters even like Ana and even like Orisa. And that's what happened when we didn't have reworked characters. We had Widows and we had Winstons that couldn't function without it. That's what happens when we had Roadhogs. That's what we even had. We had characters like Zen. Even in Overwatch 1, Zenyatta really needed some form of support like Brig. Otherwise, he struggled. Ana Zen comps were always known as a throw. Always known as a throw in Overwatch 1 because you didn't have the capability to do it. And so what ends up happening is you have this disgusting mess if it doesn't work. And so the reality of the situation is, guys, I'm going to say something that I don't think this is a hot take, but some of us need to hear it. Overwatch 1, I think, had almost inarguably the higher peaks of quality, entertaining, and fun team play. Because if you got the combo right, the capability was incredible, but it absolutely, objectively had the lowest nadir of game quality possible. And the problem is that this well is poisoned in feedback unintentionally by a lot of people that played at the higher levels with people that were willing to flex, willing to fill, willing to adjust, because that mentality allowed them to rank up. But for the vast majority of players, this was not. More often than not, we burnt the chicken. More often than not. And the worst part about it is that people now will say, oh, no, it's great. I've tried it. I played the 6v6 pugs. It's perfect. Well, it's pugs. That's pugs. It's a totally different environment. I had people in my 6v6 highlight video that I posted about a week and a half ago were like, man, you can't watch this and not say that 6v6 was better. And the title of the video was playing in 6v6 pugs with my viewers and I'm shot calling. Like, duh, right? So, this is kind of where, like, if you were willing to stomach the crap for that delicious 5-course, 5-star meal that you occasionally got, I cannot argue with you, because you're right. If that's what you like, you're right. There is that potential with Overwatch 1. You just have to make that choice. And with Overwatch 2, there's a lot less of a ceiling, but because the dynamics of the characters are spread out, there are a lot fewer bad matchups in Overwatch 1. This is true. There are a lot fewer bad matchups for Bastion and Winston and Roadhog, sadly, as much as I hate to say it, and Ana and Brigitte, and everyone has more options with what they can do, which makes, in my opinion, for a really interesting game experience, but there isn't as much reward for having that perfect cohesive team experience. And that's kind of why it's part of the whole mega tank talk here, the off tank versus main tank here, because that's why off tank has died. Because being a specialist in Overwatch 2 is a sin. I remember one tricks in Overwatch 1 were the worst. I remember playing with old Torbjorn, where a lot of his value revolved around getting the armor packs to teammates that were near you, and everybody needs to play around turret, and you need to shield me, and he didn't have overload, he didn't have the speed. It was rough. It was really, really, really rough, and it made a lot of people upset. And there's a lot of experiences like that. The one trick Symmetra, everybody had to play around the choke. Oh, frick, we got Symmetra on Numbani. She literally standing there and dying off of cooldown because she can't poke, she can't move, she can't do anything. So, I think this is kind of like where you have to choose your poison here. And I'm going to go, I think I elaborate this a lot more in the 66 video, which is currently being edited right now and will be out soon. But it's kind of like where do you choose? Where do you choose? Where do you choose? This isn't just about 5v5. This is about the general direction of where Overwatch 2 is going, where there are a lot more dynamic and interesting characters in terms of the choices that they have, but the combos are less there. I think the best analogy that I can give is that I've talked about this before. You guys remember, how many of you guys have played Age of Empires, right? Age of Empires is really famous for having a very, very, very important counter hero pick meta, where monks counter cavalry and elephants, unless it's scouts who are then countered by pikes, who are countered by archers or infantry, who are countered by heavy cavalry or hand cannoneers, who are countered by, can be either countered by siege or can be countered by heavy cavalry, siege being countered by, again, light cavalry. And so basically what ends up happening is you have this like big rock, paper, scissors, which really makes for a very interesting meal. The problem is that you have access to a lot of these choices as an individual player, but nobody would want to be the pikeman. You know, like let's say that you're playing Age of Empires. I am going to be the pikeman. And then I get counterpicked, and then I'm just, my job is just to force a counterpick, essentially. The problem with Overwatch 2 is if you are an ingredient of a bigger picture, that can be a very satisfying thing if it plays out, but then you're extremely limited with what you can do if your team doesn't cook with you. If your team doesn't cook with you, you're screwed.